Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Money to Thrive. We're going to have our participants come in here and we'll be starting in just about a minute. So looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody, for coming in. We're seeing those participants come in, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. We've got a lot of information to get through today, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for everything. So as we start today, we want to thank you for joining us for a Mercer Advisors Investors presentation about Money to Thrive, creating a secure and meaningful lives for people with disabilities. The Investors program at Mercer Advisors is focused on making important financial planning customized programs for our female clients. And one of the things that really brought us to this topic today was basically some facts. There are 48 million caregivers in the United States right now caring for someone who's over the age of 18, according to the AARP. And of that amount, it's certainly not just women. AARP estimates that there's 14 million men who are caregivers, but that leaves 70% of the family caregivers who are women. And even more interesting, and a reason to be tuned in today to this webinar, is that 24% of Americans are caring for more than one person over the age of 18 with health or functional needs. And that's an increase up from 18% in 2015. So that really makes this information more and more relevant. And we'll be talking about all of the different things that can be covered in those types of people with disabilities, whether they're from their birth or whether they develop later on in life. So as we move on today and talk about this presentation, there's some important considerations for us. So this information presented is intended to be educational, and it is not for specific advice into your individual circumstance. So very important to note that we are talking about general educational topics, giving you an overview. And then if you have specific questions, please talk to your qualified wealth advisor at Mercer Advisors about it. So speaking of Mercer Advisors, Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Kara, and thank you again, everyone, for joining. It is an honor and privilege to be with you today. And we're excited to be talking about Money to Thrive. And you may be listening to today's call, and you yourself might have a disability, or you might be listening, like Kara mentioned, and you are a caregiver for someone in your life that has a disability. Or you might just be listening in because, like Kara mentioned, there's probably going to be the likelihood that someone in your life might develop a disability. And Mercer was founded, a little bit of information for you. Mercer was founded in 1985 on the mission statement that you see here. We are unconditionally committed to work with our clients to create the best context possible for their economic freedom so they don't have to worry about money. This rang true in 1985 when Kendrick Mercer founded Mercer Advisors, and this still rings true today. And this still rings true when we think about individuals living with disability. Our mission statement is still to provide the best context for their economic freedom so they don't have to worry about money. And if we think about, again, if you're new to Mercer, we have over 60 offices throughout the country. We have the responsibility and the privilege of stewarding $38 billion of our clients' life savings. And to me, one of the most important things is that we get to help over 23,000 families with their financial planning and help them achieve their dreams and goals. And as Kara mentioned, Mercer is focused on Invest Hers, which is our women's initiative, and we are proud to have 50% of our client-facing employees are women, which is truly an industry-shattering statistic. We also have chartered financial analysts within the organization, estate planning attorneys, and a team of experts to support the needs of our clients. And if you think about all of the services that we provide, really, if it impacts your financial situation, then we can help. We collaborate with you to establish a plan for your future to get you to those goals. We do that through world-class investment portfolio management, tax planning, preparation, estate planning. We're able to draft and execute wills, trusts, powers of attorney for you. And we also have the ability to focus on insurance and corporate trustee solutions, if that may be something that you need in your life. And again, doing that from a unified, holistic approach, really having all of those experts working together to help you achieve all of your goals. And as we move into today's presentation, there's going to be a few housekeeping items. So before I introduce Chris, our subject matter expert, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature on this webinar. Please insert your questions. We want to be taking questions throughout our time today, and we'll be pausing throughout the webinar to answer those questions as well as at the end. So please put those in that Q&A chat as well. I have the privilege of introducing Chris today. Chris is our subject matter expert. Chris has been in the industry for nearly 4 decades, and he's been caring for families working in finance since 2000. Chris is a founding member of the Alliance of Comprehensive Financial Planners, and prior to joining Mercer Advisors, he was the president and founder of Pegasus Advisor. And I've had the privilege of getting to know Chris at various events that Mercer's hosted throughout the years, and he is truly a class act. And I know you're going to get a sense of that from Chris today through his personal story, because he truly has a deep affinity for creating customized plans to meet the unique needs of those individuals living with disabilities. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here today, and looking forward to stirring things up and providing some solid information for everybody in our audience today. But let's start out with a simple question. How big an issue is disability in our society? What Kara said about the number of people that are involved as caretakers throws some light on that. But also the Census Bureau and Centers for Disease Control estimate that 1 in 5 Americans, that's roughly 65 million of us, are living with a significant disability. This includes people with mobility impairments, intellectual and developmental disabilities, brain injuries, and mental illness, but it does not include Americans now dealing with the effects of long COVID. The estimates and reports just aren't out because that's a relatively new development in this field. But the bottom line is this: it's a very big number. This population is also growing rapidly, driven by our increased longevity. Less than 7% of Americans under the age of 18 have a disability, but among those of us who are 65 and over, the incidence of disability leaps to 35%. So because of that growth, with each passing day, more and more of us are dealing with these issues. This is my son, Cormac. He is an accomplished young man of 27. In high school, he was an honor student and a cheerleader. For his Eagle Scout project, he produced a movie, Cheerleader Rescue, to teach kids first aid. That movie has been downloaded from his website and viewed in dozens of countries around the world. Cormac, who has Down syndrome, has been my main contact with this world of special needs planning. He's my motivator and my longest running planning project. But Cormac's story is only one of the unique stories in my practice and in those of many of my other colleagues. Laura, could you share how this issue has cropped up in your practice, for example?
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing Cormac's story, Chris. I think, like you mentioned, in working with clients over the years, over the past almost 2 decades now, to me, working with families that have individuals with disabilities is becoming more and more common, like you mentioned. And so some of the things that I'm seeing now working with clients is maybe not a disability that occurred at birth, but what I'm seeing a lot of is families facing disabilities later in life, Chris. Mental illness, addiction, for example. I have a client that also was in a car accident and is now has a disability. And so there's a lot of that is happening later in life and maybe unexpected for a lot of families. And that's been some of the conversations that we've really been having, which isn't always from birth, but really how do we care for and provide for those in our lives that have a disability later in life? So that's something I'm facing. But Kara, what about, I know you're working with clients too. What about you, Kara?
So Laura, I'm going to build on exactly what you were saying about unexpected.
Mhm.
And one of the things that has come up, and it's very recent, is now I'm needing to talk with folks that are dealing with long COVID and have had disabilities come out as a part of that. And until 2 years ago, that wasn't even on our radar screen. And we don't know much, I think, even about what's going to happen to them in the future. So it's really important that we start understanding and planning for that now. So it isn't just from something that you have known about from birth, as Chris, I know you did with Cormac, but really understanding what could come up going forward so that you've got the proper plans placed. And I know we're going to talk about that today. So looking forward to it.
Right. I think in my practice, because of so many of my clients with these circumstances have come to me through the networking, the casual networking and social contacts that I've had. The lion's share of my clients dealing with these issues are families like ours that have youngsters with disabilities. But because of all the ways in which people become disabled, it's not always a client who has a child or a relative, other relative with disability. It may be the client itself, and so we're focused on both taking care of people with disabilities and all the people who love them, right? Regardless of how the client relationship encompasses a lot more. But the question of how to support a secure and meaningful life for a person with disability is a relatively new question or issue in the financial planning world. I've found that is helpful to break the work down into 3 phases: preventing the worst case scenario. Secondly, enhancing the financial plan to increase the availability of options for a person with disability and their family. And then third, creating better case scenarios. I'll outline each of these phases for you today, but the first step is to understand the fundamental programs on which such plans are built. There are 4 government programs that act as cornerstones of the foundation of support that most people with disabilities will need over their lifetime. Getting and maintaining eligibility for these programs is a crucial element in special needs planning. Social Security and Medicare are insurance programs. You qualify for them by paying premiums that are the taxes that are withheld from your paycheck. Most of us are familiar with Medicare and Social Security retirement benefits for older Americans, but there's also a Social Security disability program for workers who become disabled before retirement age. And if you've received Social Security disability income for 24 months or more, you become eligible for Medicare as well. So Medicare, you could be, if you are disabled at 34, you could become Medicare eligible at 36 and not have to wait until age 65 for that. But people whose disabilities are diagnosed before age 22 can become eligible for SSDI and Medicare benefits based on a parent's work history rather than their own. That's often much more, a much better benefit for them if that's available. Supplemental Security and Medicaid are means-tested entitlement programs for people with very low incomes and less than $2,000 in financial assets. SSI pays up to $841 per month for a single person with a disability. Medicaid is a health insurance program, of course, but it can also pay for various waiver programs that help with the cost of residential expenses, respite care for caretakers, and until the age of 18, a person with a disability may not qualify for these means tested benefits because of their parents' income and assets. But once they reach the age of majority, that's often when they become eligible for those. My colleague, Rob Rubel, estimated that the value of these public benefits might be $1.5 million or more. And while most people with disabilities can't afford to do without them, they certainly don't provide everything that many of us would consider necessary for a good life. They are, in other words, valuable but insufficient. Now, for families that are able to do so, supplementing these public benefits in a way that doesn't undermine them is a tricky proposition. For example, say a young person becomes eligible for SSI and Medicaid at the age of 18 and receives benefits for several years. Then sometime later, a parent dies and they get a $100,000 check from a life insurance company. Now, that inheritance immediately disqualifies them from both of their means tested benefits. And even worse, some or all of that cash may be confiscated by the state as repayment for benefits previously paid. So the first phase of special needs planning is typically focused on preventing this type of financial disaster, where people set money aside for the support of a relative with disability and then find that money does not make it there and manage to provide that support that they're looking for. So
Chris, I'll just pause for a minute, and I don't, Carol, I'll check in with you. I feel like there's a lot of questions coming, and we can specific, I think, Chris, to just what you were highlighting, and we can either take some now, Kara, or continue on. But I think, again, this is, Carol, I'll go to you for some of the questions. I know you're monitoring the Q&A there.
Absolutely. So Chris, maybe just a quick question before we move off of benefits. There's a question about, can you talk a little bit more about the SSDI and the Medicare payments based on the parent's income,
Yes.
what that means?
Right. So if you have someone who has a diagnosis prior to age 22, like Cormac, if over the course of his lifetime, we hope that he will be able to enter the workforce, earn some money on his own, and pay into the Social Security system just like every other worker in the country. But it's unlikely in his case, not because he doesn't have a good work ethic, but just because the opportunities that are available, that my work history is likely to provide a bigger benefit than his. And so because his diagnosis happened prior to age 22, once his folks have retired or are deceased and so forth, he might then become eligible for supplemental security or Social Security disability income based on his mom's work history or mine, rather than on his own. So he's got three different sources or three different work histories that might contribute some support for him, and that's important because once you start on the Social Security disability income, then 2 years after that, you become eligible for Medicare. Medicare is preferable in some ways to Medicaid as a primary insurance program. So I hope that answered that question.
Super, Chris.
That's
so
great.
We'll ask one more, and I think that the answer to this, I think maybe you're going to cover this a little further on in the conversation, but we'll raise it since it's a question about SSI. So the attendee has said that they have a son who is 30 and he's had a mental disability since birth. They've established a special needs trust that will be funded upon the death of both of the parents. And the question is, our problem is, what can we do to help our son build assets without endangering his services from SSI?
Okay. Yep. And that is a question. The best answer at this point for that question is stay tuned. We're about to get to that.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. So Chris, I know you're going to be jumping in here to preventing the worst case scenario and talking about 3 different types of special needs trusts. And we were, talking before today and just reviewing that Mercer does provide a lot of these trust options for our clients. And I've worked with clients where we've set these up. And so, Chris, talk to us about what are the 3 types of special needs trusts that you're going to cover today?
Sure. Yep. Maybe the best way to ensure the orderly transfer of those assets that we want to provide to supplement the needs of a relative with disability is to employ a discretionary needs trust, supplemental needs trust, a special needs trust. The 3 names for the same basic thing. The first type of special needs trust is what's called a third-party trust. And that is simply a trust that is created and funded by someone other than the beneficiary. If this is the beneficiary and the grantors of the trust are spouse 1 and spouse 2, all the money that goes into the special needs trust is provided by the grantors of the trust or other third parties, anybody other than the person with the disability. That's what makes it a third-party trust. And the key benefit of this type of trust is that after the passing of both the original grantors of the trust, it provides ongoing support for the person with disability. But once that person has passed away, then anything left in that third-party trust can move on to other heirs, contingent beneficiaries of the special needs trust, without that clawback of benefits previously paid by the state. So that is the primary advantage of a third-party trust. For families that are not able to accumulate a legacy big enough on its own to make an individual special needs trust feasible, the best solution may be a bequest to a master pooled trust. These trusts, which are typically run by nonprofits, aggregate many grantors' assets in order to make the cost of professional management affordable. But the third type of special needs trust is what's called a first-party trust. And that's another name for it is a Medicaid payback trust. It is funded with assets that are or were owned by the beneficiary. So this sort of trust allows the beneficiary to give up control and ownership of those assets in order to qualify for means-tested benefits, take distributions from the trust during their lifetime, but any assets that remain after the beneficiary's death are then subject to reclamation by the state as repayment for benefits previously paid. Somebody who receives a legal judgment for a medical malpractice suit or a personal injury lawsuit will often set up this type of trust where they get a big jury award and then they turn it over, poured into a first-party special needs trust so that they can qualify for Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, and so on, and but have those other benefits as well. So so if you think of the government programs as the foundation of support, and then the estate plan that you create is a kind of framework built on that foundation. So you've got the foundation now, you've built the framework with your estate plan. The next stage in building out your special needs plan is to wrap that framework of the estate planning with a thick layer of protection against other perils that can cause financial ruin. And those are principally spiraling medical costs and the premature death of a breadwinner. The big medical bills are still the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. So it's no surprise that health insurance is often the most critical need in the wake of any serious medical diagnosis. Life insurance is also more important for families with disabled dependents than it is for a typical household. Disability increases the household expenses and almost certainly decreases household income. So families like mine may need more life insurance coverage than our typical neighbors. The final component in a disaster prevention plan is what I call an operations manual. So families that are dealing with disability issues really need to be better organized than a typical household. This operations manual is a document or system that's used to gather all the information that someone would need to step into your shoes and carry on as a case manager and caretaker for a person with a disability. This is critically important for the surviving spouse, right? Because in married couples dealing with these issues, often you just delegate things and you don't communicate all that much about how you're doing what you are taking care of. So it's critically important if you lose a spouse that you have some record of what they were doing as those in-kind contributions to household management. It's also very important for successor caretakers when someone with a disability moves out of their family of origin or loses the service of a helper somewhere along the way. So basic element is just a good filing system. These days, a password logbook or password managing software is essential for maintaining one's sanity and connection in the digital age. For anyone dealing with complex medical conditions, a medical records keeper provides convenient place to list healthcare providers, information about prescriptions, medical devices, and so on. And finally, there are various guides to help you organize your finances and prepare to make or to memorialize the estate plan that you've created. One publisher, the Peter Popper Press, offers a password logbook, health records book, and a peace of mind organizer, 3 different books for a total of $35. If you prefer online tools to spiral notebooks and binders, then you could check out Everplans. Everplans.com is a cloud-based program that will lead you through the process of organizing your financial records and creating an estate plan. So,
Chris, the questions are coming in, and so I'll just for everybody I'll do a quick summary or recap of those 4 things that you highlighted that are incredibly important, what we need to do. The first thing that you talked about is understand government benefits, and as many of us can probably attest, sometimes that's difficult to understand all of the complexities. And I would encourage, if people have questions, we would love to talk to you more. I know Chris would, about the specifics of your situation. And the second piece is that implement an estate plan. You talked about those 3 different types of special needs trusts. Put that estate plan to work. And the third thing is looking at life insurance. Life insurance does play a part in your financial plan. And there's different options, and we can understand what might be right for your family in those scenarios. And then I love what you said, that 4th thing, Chris, create the operations manual. You've got me thinking I need to go home, talk to my husband, redo the operations manual now that, we've had more kids than when we originally did it. So it's a good reminder for anyone to create that operations manual, because like you said, if a spouse unexpectedly passes away or a caregiver, you never know when you might need to step in and have all of those items in one spot. Kara, the questions are flying in, so I'm going to go over to you as people are continuing to put those questions in for some Q&A right now.
They absolutely are. And so we're getting lots of questions. So please be assured, if we don't answer them live here, that we will get back to you, or you can certainly contact us. But I'm trying to go through all of them and see what we can get answered here. So Chris, a couple of things about special needs trusts. The first question is, can they be funded by life insurance? And the second is, should special needs trusts be funded as part of the estate plan?
It is possible. Oftentimes, life insurance policy is the preferred method for funding a special needs trust. In many cases, a survivorship life or second to die policy is a great way to fund a special needs trust, because you want that special needs trust to be funded when mom and dad are not there. And so a life insurance policy that pays its benefit when the second of those two people has passed away, that money shows up, at the time when you want to be funding the special needs trust in a significant way. So yes, life insurance is one way to fund it. There any number of other things that can go into a special needs trust. Again, that the planning around that is something that you want to do carefully and in close consultation with your financial advisor. In terms of the timing of the trust or funding of the trust, the funding of the special needs trust is something that's often left until later stages of the financial life cycle, because trusts are very inefficient vehicles for accumulating assets. They're great, essential vehicles for distributing assets, but trusts are taxed at rates that are much higher than individuals, so that makes them a rather inefficient way of accumulating assets. So you accumulate those assets somewhere else, pour them over into the special needs trust when the time is right, and then distribute them from that going forward.
Great. We've got a lot of questions about trusts, and some are related to an ABLE account. So I know you're planning to talk about that here in a minute. I'm going to save those until we get to that section, but maybe just a few more. And again, we'll follow up with you as well if we do not miss those. But talking about a special needs trust, if it's funded by a life insurance payout, is that a first person or a third person trust?
Typically, that would be a third party trust.
Great.
Right. Yeah.
And then the last that we'll cover in this section before we move on, because I know you've got a lot more to talk about. The question is, please discuss trust and other supports when the disabled person is the spouse and one of the grantors. Does that change things?
Yes. Yeah, that complicates the planning situation for sure.
So that sounds like a yes, and please talk to one of your advisor about this, and we can help you with it.
Absolutely, there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the discipline that we call special needs planning in general, and that branch of special needs planning that is commonly called elder law. They have a lot in common, and when you're talking about these more surprise or later in life types of disabilities that crop up, then that's more something that is in the wheelhouse of elder law rather than special needs trust more generally. So
great. We'll come
question.
Back to a lot more of the questions here too, but I know you've got more to cover here, Chris.
Right. So, it is many of the financial firms that are out there that do any sort of work in special needs programs of any kind are focused solely on this first of the three processes that are involved in doing this work. But there is a lot more to do beyond just preventing a financial disaster if you're intent upon helping create better case scenarios and giving a person with disabilities better options. Here's how I've come to think about it just recently. You remember that scene in the movie Jaws when they get their first close-up view of the shark? The famous line that you remember from that scene is, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." Right? And so people with disabilities need more than a basic financial plan. All the usual tools and techniques that we use still apply, but they have to be modified and adapted. So let's go on now to talk about some of the features of that bigger boat that is needed to get us where we want to be. Consider the financial life cycle. If you boil it down, there are just 3 phases to the financial life cycle. You have a dependency phase when you're someone else's dependent. You have an accumulation phase when you're earning your keep, so to speak, and you have a distribution phase when you're using your accumulated assets to provide for your own support instead of just the sweat of your brow. If you're a person with a disability, then you're on the same road. It's just that the relative size of the different phases may vary from that of a typical peer. It might take you a little longer to reach your accumulation phase. Your accumulation phase might be a bit shorter because you might need to exit that a bit sooner, and so your distribution phase may be relatively longer by comparison. But it's the same road, just a slightly different lane. I've also found that the complexity of the disability world requires a more detailed map. And so this adaptive financial life cycle that I created to work with families that have relatives with disabilities can really help you get a focus on where you are within the financial life cycle as a family, as an individual with special needs, and look back and see what, if anything, is unfinished business from a previous stage that you should have taken care of but didn't get around to, what you should focus on today, where you're at, and how to get from the current stage of the life cycle that you're in to the next one in an efficient manner. A disability diagnosis requires one critical recalculation in the financial plan. Your long-term retirement savings goal has to be increased. As a couple with a child who happens to have a disability, you may find yourself planning a retirement for 3 people instead of just 2. If you are an empty nester whose spouse has just had a stroke, you may be suddenly looking at early retirement adjustments to your plan. So, but in both of those cases, you need money to make up for the increase of expenses and the shorter earning phases that you have to deal with. To hit that higher savings number, you'll probably need to do 2 things. 1, increase your savings rate, and 2, buy more life insurance to guarantee the completion of the new plan. It's also vitally important to push these savings into the most efficient vehicles for wealth accumulation. As I mentioned earlier, in answer to a question, the Special Needs Trust is an essential tool, but not necessarily an efficient one for accumulating assets, because a married couple doesn't reach the highest federal tax rate until their income exceeds $375,000, but a trust hits that same 39% bracket with an income of about $9,000 per year. So the Special Needs Trust is not an envelope that you want to stuff full of money as soon as you get it created. Cash value life insurance is also a less efficient savings vehicle than retirement accounts for most people. It's much more important that you focus on having an adequate amount of life insurance coverage, and term insurance makes that much easier to afford. Until recently, there was no savings account specifically designed for individuals with disabilities in the United States, although our neighbors to the north, Canada, has had them for more than 20 years. The ABLE Act of 2014 created such a savings account that is especially exciting. It's an inexpensive, flexible plan that encourages community inclusion through paid employment. It's built on the same pattern as the 529 college savings plan. An ABLE account is an asset that a person with a disability can own without disqualifying themselves from Medicaid or SSI if the balance is less than $100,000. Now, that limitation of $100,000 means that it can't take the place of a special needs trust, right? And that someone asked the question about that. It does act as a great substitute for an IRA or 401k for folks who are able to earn a bit more than they need to get by. This can allow a person with a disability who has earned income to accumulate those funds for education, for a vehicle, for other major purpose, just for the mere experience of earning some money and then having the power to control it and spend it on what you choose to spend it on. So, Laura?
Sure, I'll jump in here and give a recap, Chris, because again, I think you answered several of the questions around ABLE accounts in that last section. So really 3 keys to modify a financial plan or a family's financial plan when they have a family member or someone in their life with a disability, could be themselves. First thing, like you mentioned, really understanding that current situation and focusing on resources for those critical issues. I love that second one. You talked about really ramping up savings, increasing savings, and that 15% is such a great number or such a great target. And then again, that third one, that this is often tricky, even for clients that I'm working with, is accumulating assets in the most efficient savings vehicles. Oftentimes people might think they're putting money in the right spots, but really making sure that you're maximizing and being tax efficient with those different savings vehicles. So those 3 key modifications there. Chris, I'll let you continue to talk about this next section, which I'm excited to hear more about, and moving from kind of worst case to the financial plan is really creating better or best case scenarios. So Chris, back to you.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think we're in a whole new world when it comes to creating secure and meaningful lives for our loved ones with disabilities. The key element of the most creative, cutting edge planning in this field is inclusion in the broader community. As more and more people with disabilities have been included in public schools, they've acquired not just knowledge and skills, but also typical aspirations. There's a rapidly growing number of post-secondary educational opportunities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And as these folks move into the working world, they sometimes struggle to keep their hard-earned money from disqualifying themselves from those means-tested benefits that can be a vital source of support for them. So shaping better case scenarios is neither simple nor easy, but it can start with a bold vision. For anyone not familiar with his work, George Kinder has been a pioneer in deepening and expanding the financial planning profession to include principles of life planning. He is famous for creating profound and unsettling questions to spark serious, insightful conversations with clients. In that spirit, let me tag on one more question to this list from George. What if all of us truly meant all of us, even those of us who may never have more than $2,000 in our checking accounts? People with disabilities often have more than their share of plans. They have medical care plans, individualized education plans, transition plans, and so on. However, many of these plans tend to focus on their deficits rather than their dreams, on those things that are important for them rather than what's important to them. In other words, these plans tend to get stuck at the lower end of the person's hierarchy of needs. Tools and techniques developed in the field of person-centered planning can help shift the focus upward through and lead one through a robust process that results in an individual truly gaining ownership of their dreams and being able to ardently pursue a meaningful life on their own terms. A better case scenario should be founded on 4 solid cornerstones. We'll address each of these. 2 are pretty solid, but the others are still a bit shaky. What's now known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was originally enacted in 1975. It explicitly stated that children with disabilities are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. Despite never having been adequately funded and often meeting with much resistance, this law has been extraordinarily successful in creating a more inclusive environment in our public schools, thereby profoundly changing the lives of 2 generations of young people, both those with disabilities and their typical peers. It's hard to overestimate what IDEA has done to set the stage for people with disabilities to become more integrated into the broader community. In 2008, Congress extended the principles of IDEA by passing the Higher Education Opportunity Act, which supports development of post-secondary education programs for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As of 2019, 265 such programs have been created, providing access to vocational training, college courses, and campus life for a more diverse student body. What's now known as the Special Olympics movement began in 1963 as a summer camp started in the backyard of Eunice Kennedy Shriver. It is now the largest athletic program for young people with intellectual disabilities, with 5 million participants in 172 countries. I should maybe reconsider that younger people, because 3 of these 4 athletes are competing in what they call the 16 to 99 age bracket. So it's not just young people in Special Olympics. But other organizations have sprung up to foster friendships and provide inclusive opportunities for recreational activities in community. Best Buddies, for example, pairs college students with young adults in their communities who happen to have disabilities. Some churches have created inclusive worship services and operate respite programs for families that have relatives with disabilities. For-profit businesses are also stepping up to improve access to their products and services for people with disabilities. You can think of a local movie theater chain that offers special show times to people on the autism spectrum. Also, network television now broadcasts not just the Olympics, but the Paralympics too. So there's an audience there and a need in this area that's being met in more and more ways. The Supreme Court's Olmstead decision in 1999 found that the segregation of people with disabilities in housing is unlawful discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. What this ruling means is that individuals with disabilities should be able to receive services they require in the most integrated and least restrictive setting appropriate to their needs. This integration mandate has fueled the shift away from segregated state-operated institutions and toward community-based services. Most adults with disabilities live with and depend upon their parents as primary caretakers. The problem with this arrangement, according to Robin Leogrand, who is president of the nonprofit Community for Permanent Supportive Housing, is that those parent caretakers are aging. 20% of them are age 60 or over, and an even larger cohort is coming up right behind them. Robin estimates that as those caretakers become unable to care for them, only 3% of these adults with disabilities will be able to find an available bed as alternative accommodations. According to her research, in a 7-county area of North Texas, we're currently short about 85,000 housing units, and the private sector market forces do not appear to be anticipating or creating solutions to this significant problem. So housing for people with disabilities is a true frontier with lots of exploration and experimentation taking place. According to business consulting firm McKinsey and Company, more than 6 million Americans with disabilities are currently employed. Sadly, that represents less than 20% of working age individuals with disabilities. In contrast, 66% of the general working age population is employed. There are economic costs to society that result from the underutilization of this population. A study published by McKinsey in 2014 showed that employing people with Down syndrome has a positive impact on organizational health. And further, the research showed that in firms ranging from mining companies to banks, firms that focused on balance of performance and health outperformed competitors that focused on performance alone. Since 2020, employers around the globe have struggled to find ways to keep employees at work and serving customers safely and productively. They have, to various degrees, learned how to accommodate and modify the workplace to account for all of our vulnerabilities to the novel coronavirus. In doing so, they have learned lessons that could be extended to employees they might not have considered adding to their workforce previously. In a recent newsletter, McKinsey stated an equitable economic recovery from COVID-19 will include Americans with disabilities, and the future growth of the US economy will be strengthened by their participation. Their research indicates that the expansion of labor force participation among that 80% of Americans with disabilities who are not currently employed could add nearly $215 billion to the US GDP by 2040. And further, the impact could boost global GDP by $400 billion. So furthering the integration of individuals with disabilities into society as students, as athletes, as neighbors, and co-workers makes a better case scenario, not just for them, but for all of us. And I hope you will join us in helping to make that happen.
Thanks, Chris, for such great information. And we've been getting so many questions. I know that that has sparked that, but I thought that I would share what I thought was a wonderful question. And I'm actually going to answer it for you because one of our participants wanted to know how your son, Cormac, managed to become so successful. So I'm going to give you a moment of dad pride there. And I will say it's because Cormac is a tremendous young man, but he also has parents who have done planning for him and with him. And that is our philosophy at Mercer Advisors, that we really hope that you will do as well. And we offer our help with that. So just thought I'd give you a nice little dad pride moment there, and we'll answer as many of these questions as we can.
Yeah, I think that one of the main things that I've learned in working with him over the years is you have to learn not to discount the dream. If he has a dream, you know, you want to do what you can to help make it happen, and you're always going to be surprised by the power of those dreams. You know, at some point in his teenage years, he had a dream to join the cast of the TV show Glee, right? And I thought, okay, well, I've heard him sing. I don't think that's happening. But you know, and he's not on the show, but within a year of his telling me that's what he wanted to do, he did attend a National Down Syndrome Congress, and he met the actress with Down syndrome who was on the show, and he went home from the conference with her cell phone number and email address. So he's
not surprise me in the least.
He's not a cast member, but he is connected.
Wonderful. Well, going on to a bunch more questions that we've got here. So going back to special needs trust, we have a question about it. What if one family member does plan ahead with the special needs trust, but other family members either haven't or won't or don't? So without trying to direct other people to special needs trust to inherit on behalf of that beneficiary, there are other options that should be considered so that the special needs heir isn't refusing their inheritance.
Right. Great question. And here's a key point, right? A family or family and friends group or a network, whatever size group you're talking about, they may only need one special needs trust for that individual. And any third party can put money into a third party trust like that. So we created a special needs trust while we were still as a separate entity. It's a bucket, an empty bucket that we created and put it on the shelf. And it's been there and largely unfunded for a long period of time, but it's there so that if a grandparent or rich uncle or other benefactor wants to leave a bequest to flow into that trust for Cormac's benefit, it's there and it's on the shelf and ready to go. And after we created that, we went ahead and notified other close relatives that we thought might have an interest in providing support for him, that if they wanted to do so, the best way was to make a gift to, the trustee of blah, blah, blah trust, for his benefit. And the same thing that you can do there. Only you don't need to have a whole bunch of different special needs trusts if one will do the job.
Terrific. And I know we've got a lot of questions here, so rest assured we have recorded them all. And if we don't answer them live here, we will follow up with you. So please don't be disappointed as we're getting here close to our time, but maybe we can answer one last question before we finish up. So talking about ABLE accounts and retirement, can an employer submit a 401k contribution to an ABLE account?
That's going to depend on the ERISA document, the plan document. I would be surprised at this point if there is any kind of coordination between ERISA documents that control what happens with qualified retirement plans and ABLE accounts, because the ABLE accounts are relatively, they're relative newcomers on the block, and I don't think that there is a question about that. But if a person with a disability has a participant account inside a 401k, that could conceivably disqualify them for their benefits, but they themselves could take the contributions that goes into that account and put it in their own ABLE account to keep that from happening. So it's possible to get the money from that if the plan would allow for in-service distributions.
Terrific. So I think now we've got all the questions. Again, we have recorded them. We will make sure you get an answer to them. I'm going to turn it over here to Laura to wrap us up.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kara. And thank you again, Chris, for walking us through today's content. I know, like Kara mentioned, so many questions, a lot of interest around this conversation. And as we close out our time today, I want to invite everybody just to pause for a minute. Chris, you said something at the beginning that really grabbed my attention. You said all of us truly means all of us. And I want the audience, I want you to just think about what that means in your own life. All of us means all of us. And think about the people that are in your lives with disabilities. This might be you today. You might be walking through life like 1 in 5 Americans, like Chris mentioned, living with a disability. Or you might have someone that is incredibly close to you and you're navigating this for the first time. And I want to just remind you that Mercer's here and we're here to help. We're here to help you make an impact in the world and put together, like Chris talked about, that plan for the better case scenario that supports your goals and your dreams, and not to question the dream, but to support the dream of either if that's your dream or the dreams of your loved ones with disabilities. And throughout our time, we've spent looking at a lot of different things, and we've covered a lot of information. And if you're new to Mercer, if you have questions, we would love to talk to you. And if you're a client of Mercer, please reach out to your wealth advisor, your financial advisor, to talk about the specifics of your situation. And again, if you're joining us for the first time and want to know more, look for the follow-up from our team to get a complimentary wealth management consultation where we can walk through these different items to help you take advantage of the strategies that Chris laid out for us today to help you achieve that economic freedom. So thank you again for your time. It was wonderful to be with you all, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
you.